Hi everybody, welcome back to Anna Reads. We have, once again, Walt Disney, an American Original by Bob Thomas. I've got Jasmine going on today, and if you'll notice, this little fella has obviously nothing to do with Aladdin, which would be the next Disney Renaissance film. Kermit the Frog here. Today, Jim Henson would have been 84 years old, so let's just remember to thank everybody for our childhoods and for the wonderful work that they've done. So Kermit's gonna sit right here with me. And yeah, these are leopard print flats. I couldn't actually find my gold flats, so we're just gonna go with that. So are we ready to get right into chapter 18? I think we are. There we go, 18. The Disney fortunes began to turn in 1950. The long, hungry years ended with public acceptance of Cinderella, the first unqualified hit for the studio since Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Treasure Island was also very well received, and the second of the true-life adventures, Beaver Valley, proved even more popular than Seal Island. By the end of 1950, the debt to Bank of America had been reduced to $1,700,000. And in those days, the new, unaccustomed prosperity relieved Walt of the anxiety he had felt in the floundering post-war years. The worried scowl that studio workers had grown accustomed to now appeared less often. In April 1951, he wrote to his producer in England, Percy Pierce, "Everything is looking swell here at the plant. Alice is just about ready to be wrapped up, and I think it is about as good as can be done with it. I think it is going to be an exciting show. While it does have the tempo of a three-ring circus, it still has plenty of entertainment, and it should satisfy everyone except a certain handful who can never be satisfied." I'd like to bring you my own opinion on Walt Disney's presentation of Alice in Wonderland. I'm autistic. I did not receive an autism diagnosis until the age of 19. I'm not going to tell you how old I am now, so don't go asking. Alice, as presented by Walt Disney to me, is a wonderful allegory, a very poignant allegory for what it's like to live with autism. Everyone else is dangerous, unpredictable, and crazy, and you have no idea why at any given point in time one of these characters might want to hurt you. So just the next time you watch Disney's Alice in Wonderland, the 50s one, not the Tim Burton one. I mean, I like that one too. Unpopular opinion, I genuinely liked that film. Just kind of let that roll through your head and keep it there while you deal with people who might be a bit different from you. So just do that for me, okay? Thanks. He revealed his reservations about Alice in Wonderland. He had wrestled with the subject since 1933 when he contemplated a version with Mary Pickford as a live-action Alice. Years later, he planned to put Ginger Rogers in a cartoon Wonderland. I would pay good money to see that. Like $5 at least, because that's kind of what I can spare. $5 and a chicken sandwich. Can somebody make this happen? Aldous Huxley at one time worked on a script. Walt abandoned Alice in Wonderland again and again until finally he scheduled it to follow Cinderella. And what is all over my pants? There's something on my pants that I just discovered. Yuck. OxyClean. He dropped the idea of a live-action Alice. Practically everyone who has read and loved the book of necessity sees the Tenniel Alice, he explained in a letter to a New Jersey fan, and no matter how closely we approximate her with a living Alice, I feel the result would be a disappointment. Walt tried to alter the storyline to fit the cartoon needs, at one time expanding the role of the White Knight as hero rescuer. But he was intimidated by the threats of Lewis Carroll purists, and he returned to the original story. I'm sure y'all by now can infer my opinion on fandom gatekeepers. If you can't, just read the thought bubble over my head. Is that language allowed here? I'm sure it's not, so just use your imaginations, all right? During storyboard sessions, Walt tried to maintain his normal enthusiasm, but it was difficult. Animation was as tedious as the story development. Walt kept asking his animators why the drawing was taking so much time. The unspoken answer was that the animators weren't enjoying it. The animators sometimes arrived at brilliant invention, but it was punishing work. Everyone felt relief when Alice in Wonderland was finished, especially Walt. He vowed never again to undertake a tamper-proof classic. Right. Kermit, keep it to yourself. Thank you. He had hoped to keep faith with the traditionalists while trying to please the millions who expected an entertaining show from Walt Disney. He satisfied neither. Alice in Wonderland had its premiere in Lewis Carroll's home country, and London critics belabored Disney for the liberties he took. American audiences were also disappointed, and the film lost $1 million, erasing the glow of prosperity that Cinderella had brought to Walt Disney Productions. Someday, Walt sighed, I would like to reach the position where this company doesn't have to live from one picture to the next. Peter Pan was the next cartoon. Walt had bought the rights to the James M. Barrie play in 1939, and he'd spent years trying to fashion a cartoon story. As with Alice in Wonderland, he found it difficult to bring warmth to the characters, and Peter Pan was set aside from time to time. I've already given you my opinion on the Disney version of Peter Pan, and I encourage you, if you've not already, to go watch the Mary Martin version. Compare, contrast, or don't. Enjoy them both on their own merits. That's really all I'm going to say about that. Then in 1951, Walt put it into production. With the studio expanding into new fields, he could no longer lavish time on all aspects of the film. His comments and storyboard sessions seem more succinct, though no less incisive. We don't have the right crocodile yet. It's out of character. Watch so as not to get Hook's teeth too big. Rebuild the tick-tock scene of Hook. Get expression of fear in his eyes. I don't like the hair raising. Smee cries too much. We want to make the music a little more important. I think music will tie it together. Don't hesitate to reshoot anything you need. Anything you don't need, don't hesitate to throw it away after you have looked at it. An overlap is never good. Cut close. On the last C, you need room for Smee to compose himself before he sticks out his tongue. Then, whoom! I like the business of Hook getting all dolled up. It's good business. You hear the creaking of the ship and the tick-tock. Have a ray of light streaming out from the porthole, and the crocodile would be swimming around in the water in the stream of light, and at a certain point we would see his eyes. When we get the fight going on the ship and the croc finally comes in, it should be a nice surprise. I was thinking of the fight. The tempo should pick up and the croc's tail would wave faster. Perhaps arrange a few places where Peter Pan might have Hook out over the water and the croc is waiting, but don't slow it up. Walt was planning for a second English-made live-action feature, The Story of Robin Hood, for filming in the summer of 1951. His pre-production memos to his aides in England, Percy Pearce and Fred Leahy, indicate his concentration on details. Let me unfold myself here, excuse me. Let's see. The final tests arrived the first part of the week, and we looked at them. I think Richard Todd is wonderful, and I feel he will project a great deal of personality and do a lot for the role. Joan Rice is beautiful and charming. However, I think she will need some help on her dialogue. I thought at times she lacked sincerity, although one of her close-ups was very cute. I do not care much about her costumes in the first scene. It seems that women of that period always have scarves up around their chin, but I think it does something to a woman's face. I'd like to see us avoid it if possible, or get around it in some way or other. maybe use it in fewer scenes. I agree with him on that. For as many years as I've been going to Renaissance festivals, I've never bothered with all that scarf up to here business. When we see Miss Rice disguised as a page, this costume seemed bulky and heavy. The blouse or tunic was too long and hung too far down over her hips. It didn't show enough of her, and I thought distracted from her femininity. The gag, of course, with gender bending in period is, yes, you can tell that's a girl. If you watch any of Mozart, you will see that as well. The scenes where, I can never recall his name. This character is played by a soprano, a mezzo-soprano, but the character is a boy dressed as a girl pretending to be a boy. It's, I believe that's what passed for hilarity in those days. I do not believe the costume did much to set off her femininity. I think a slight showing of the hips would help a lot. I liked Elton Hayes as Alan Adale. He has a good voice with quite an appeal. The last word I had from Larry Watkin was to the effect that he would be sending in a new and completed script very soon. I have been following his changes, and the little thoughts I have are close to lint picking, which I feel he is smoothing out in his final script, so I won't bother about passing on my thoughts until I get his so-called final script. Television was also occupying Walt's thinking. The networks had been importuning him to provide entertainment for the new medium, and in 1950, Walt agreed to produce a Christmas show for the National Broadcasting Company, known now as NBC. As producer, he assigned Bill Walsh, a one-time publicist who began at the studio as a gag writer for the Mickey Mouse comic strips in 1943. Sorry, I'm trying to gauge how much we've got of this one. We've got a lot of pictures here, but I don't think I'll... Let's see, where's the rest? Okay. Walt acted as guide to the studio for ventriloquist Edgar Bergen and his dummies Charlie McCarthy and Mortimer Snerd, and the Disney Daughters also appeared on the show. I am terrified of ventriloquist dummies, so Fun and Fancy Free was a gigantic behavioral aberration for my tolerance as a small child. I don't do dummies, I don't do dummies, I don't do dummies. No thank you. It attracted a huge audience, impressing Walt with the value of television as a signboard for the studio's theatrical product. Another Christmas special was produced in 1951. Walt foresaw a future for educational films on television, and he reactivated his studio's educational division. Again, I can just hear Jiminy Cricket. The old I'm no fool shorts. With his work at the studio intensifying, Walt found relaxation in his hobby of miniatures. Shane, if you're watching. He began by making his own small objects for the caboose of the Carrollwood Pacific train. He spent hours nightly fashioning tiny replicas of furniture in the red barn he used for a workshop. His long, slender, dexterous fingers allowed him to manipulate small objects with inordinate skill. He was fascinated with small objects, and he collected them during his travels to Europe. I have a fair collection of Swarovski crystal miniatures, many of them Disney, that my dad brought to me from around the world. Where was I? When Lily, Diane, and Sharon returned from a shopping tour of Paris, they found Walt on the floor of their hotel suite, surrounded by small animated animals. He was particularly impressed with a caged bird which moved its tail and beak and issued an intermittent song. He brought the bird to the studios and instructed one of his technicians, Waddle Rogers, take this apart and find out how it works. Rogers performed an autopsy on the bird and discovered that it was operated by clockworks and a double bellows. Can you hear it? Can you hear it? I sing so beautiful, I should sing solo. Si, solo, we can't hear you. I'm speaking, of course, of the Enchanted Tiki Room. Let's see. Wally Boag and Thurl Ravenscroft come immediately to mind. One day, Walt said to Ken Anderson, I'm tired of everybody else around here. I'm tired of having everybody else around here do the drawing and painting. I'm going to do something creative myself. I'm going to put you on my personal payroll, and I want you to draw 24 scenes of life in an old western town. Then I'll carve the figures and make the scenes in miniature. When we get enough of them made, we'll send them out as a traveling exhibit. We'll get an office here at the studio, and you and I will be the only ones who will have keys. While Anderson started work on the sketches, Walt placed advertisements in newspapers and hobby magazines, seeking vintage miniatures of all kinds. He began work on the first of the scenes, which he called Granny Kincaid's Cabin, based on a set of So Dear to My Heart. I remembered! Lavender Blue was from So Dear to My Heart, as sung by Burl Ives. You'll know him from his Christmas music, of course. Of course? Well, if you're not familiar, the song was featured in the 2015 remake by Kenneth Branagh of Cinderella. Let's see if I can remember all of it. Lavender's blue, dilly-dilly, lavender's green. If I were king, dilly-dilly, I'd need a queen. Who told me so, dilly-dilly, who told me so? I told myself, dilly-dilly, I told me so. And I think that's probably as much as I can get away with without getting slapped with a C&D. Thank you for humoring me, Kermit. Everything was depicted in scale: the spinning wheel, rag rug on the plank floor, flintlock rifle on the wall, guitar, washbowl and pitcher, family Bible on the center table. In the bedroom beyond the living room could be seen the featherbed four-poster with Crazy Quilt. The kitchen was equipped with wood-burning stove and tiny pots and utensils. Walt attended to every detail. I hope you didn't hear that. I'm really hungry. For the chimney, he picked up pebbles at his vacation home in Palm Springs. To bend wood into the contour of chairs, he borrowed the pressure cooker from the family kitchen. Alton Brown, there's a multitasker for ya. He planned Granny Kincaid's cabin without human figures. Viewers would hear the voice of Granny describing the scene, and Walt recorded a narration by Beulah Bondi, who had played Granny in So Dear to My Heart. Even before he finished Granny Kincaid's cabin, Walt was planning a more ambitious scene. He wanted movement in the miniatures, and he devised a frontier music hall with an entertainer performing a dance. To provide a model for the figure, he hired Buddy Ebsen to demonstrate an old-time dance before the camera. Buddy Ebsen, as you fans of vintage television probably remember, was old Jed Clampett on the Beverly Hillbillies, but before that even, he was slated to play the Tin Man alongside Judy Garland, Ray Bolger, Margaret Hamilton, Billy Burke et al. In The Wizard of Oz. However, he had a terrible reaction to the makeup they used, and interestingly enough, I've quite forgotten who they cast as the Tin Man. Jack something, I want to say. Jack, or maybe that was the Cowardly Lion. Someone comment, remind me. Remember, the Wicked Witch of the West never killed anything but Margaret Hamilton's career. Sorry, I'm a Wicked fan and I'll be salty about that for the rest of my life. Then Walt asked his machine shop crew to analyze the action, frame by frame, and try to devise a way to animate a 9-inch figure with the same movements. This Scottish name, Roger we'll call him, and the shop technicians invented a system of cables and cams to make the figure dance. "That's good," Walt said, as he watched the antic dance of the little man. "Now let's try something different." His new project was a miniature barbershop quartet that would not only move, but sing Sweet Adeline. That remains one of my favorite scenes in the Lucy-Desi Comedy Hour. The machine shop improved on the Dancing Man mechanism and routined the quartet to 1.5 minutes of singing. We have many, many, many pictures here, and in my last video, last video for this book, I believe I'll regale you with a few. Oh, what have we here? On the site of the Florida project. I know you probably can't see that all too clearly, but that's definitely Florida. Walt began dropping by the shop every day to observe the progress on the models. Often he lost track of time, and his secretary called frantically to inquire, "Is Walt still there? He's an hour late to his appointments." Walt's scheme for the traveling exhibit was to depict a series of interconnected small-town scenes. The general store window could be seen from the barbershop, etc. But the project never got beyond the early stages of the singing quartet. Walt realized that the small size of the exhibit would not allow enough volume of viewers to make it profitable. Besides, he wanted his craftsmen to devote their effort to the amusement park he wanted to build. I give you the Florida project. Roy Disney continued his opposition to the park. He argued that with the failure of Alice in Wonderland, the company had fallen deeper into debt, and a venture as risky as an amusement park simply couldn't be financed. Walt responded by citing an incident of their childhood. It happened in April 1906, when the Disney family was en route from Chicago to Marceline. During the visit to Flora's sister in Fort Madison, Walt had found a pocket knife in the street. "Goodness gracious, I can hear my own grandmother going, 'Give me that, you'll get tetanus.' 'Give it to me, you'll cut yourself,' said his older brother, appropriating the knife. 45 years later, Walt taunted Roy, 'Yeah, it's just like the time you took that knife away from me in Fort Madison. You've been taking things away from me all my life.' You know what? I'll go ahead and air this dirty laundry. I was that kid when I was growing up. People stole my stuff, broke my stuff, constantly. You'll see there's still stuff. I'm a bit of a dragon my own self because of so many years people trying to take my things from me, so I understand totally and completely where Walt is coming from here, and if I witnessed that argument as a small bird, I would be on Walt's side and pecking Roy relentlessly around his head. If I was a squirrel, I'd run right up his pant leg. When Walt Disney was a young man, a fortune teller had predicted that he would die at the time of his birthday before he reached the age of 35. Okay then. Although he was not superstitious, the prediction had a profound effect on him, and he continued to brood about it long after it had proved false. The sense of mortality weighed on him, and he seemed to be in a race against time to accomplish all the work he wanted to do. I'm looking around at an immense collection of Disney merchandise here in my own life. I understand that too. He only had so many years to give us everything he wanted to give. Oh God, I need to not look at Kermit right now. Oh, here I go again. "I hate to see the weekend come," he remarked, complaining of the break in his usual pace. Similarly, he resented holidays. He enjoyed taking Lily and their daughters to Europe and delighted them delighted in showing them the places he had known in the First World War. But while he was away, he instructed his secretary to send him daily reports of studio activities. "You don't know how homesick I am when I'm away," he said. Walt's devotion to his work limited his social life. He liked to watch the Hollywood Stars baseball team at Gilmore Stadium and occasionally attended the horse races in Santa Anita and Hollywood Park. On warm summer evenings, he and Lily listened to the symphonies under the stars and at the Hollywood Bowl. They dined out at Chasen's, Romanoff's, or Trader Vic's. Good Lord, there's still a Trader Vic's in Atlanta, as I understand it. I've never been during Dragon Con, but one of these days, I can only hope. Maybe I'll dress up all 50s crazy and take Kermit here as my date. But most of the time they ate at home. Their entertaining was generally with small dinner parties, and they were strictly social, not business. Walt grew better looking as he matured. By the time he reached 50, his 5-foot 10-inch frame had filled out, and his face seemed more distinguished. His hair remained thick as ever, assuming an edge of gray. The mustache, which had given him a dapper appearance in his earlier years, looked appropriate now. Oddly, he didn't like actors with mustaches in his movies. He thought they looked like city slickers. It kind of makes me wonder if that was factual in Saving Mr. Banks, if he insisted upon Mr. Banks having a mustache, or if that was David Tomlinson's idea. You know, off the top of my head, I can't quite remember if Professor Emilius Brown in Bedknobs and Broomsticks had one. The soundtrack's right over there, but I don't feel like unfolding myself. His taste in clothes grew more conservative. He no longer wore the sporty outfits of his early Hollywood days. He insisted that his clothes be comfortable, and he rarely wore a necktie at the studio, preferring Western-style neckerchiefs with the Smoke Tree Ranch insignia, of which he had dozens. Given that I'm here in cheap stretch jeans and a t-shirt, I understand that too. I'd live in Jersey cotton if I could. Ew, eyelash. His wife and daughters found it impossible to buy clothes for him except for sweaters and handkerchiefs. He preferred to choose his own outfits, and every 2 years he went to Bullock's Wilshire in Los Angeles and bought a supply. Whenever his jackets were sent to the cleaners, the pockets had to be emptied of the crackers and nuts he carried for snacks while he was working. Walt dressed and undressed swiftly. Remember, those also carried different contexts in those days. Dress and undress, of course, were to put your clothes on and take your clothes off, but dress and undress also referred to levels of dress. I believe that etymology dates back to 1770 something. I remember it from my Felicity books, excuse me. Moving on. One evening, Sharon commented that he hadn't changed his clothes for a friend's party that was beginning in a few minutes. "It'll only take me a couple of minutes to dress," Walt replied. "Besides, it doesn't matter if I'm late. All they do is stand around and drink." There's merit to that statement as well. I don't personally believe in being fashionably late, but I can get ready in record time. The Disneys spent Easter, Thanksgiving, and between Christmas and New Year's at Smoke Tree Ranch, a Palm Springs development where families maintained vacation houses, taking meals in a communal dining room. The girls were growing up. In 1951, Diane entered the University of Southern California, and Sharon was a sophomore at Westlake High School. Walt attended Parents' Night at Sharon's school, sometimes complaining about too much homework for his daughter. My dad had the same complaint, math especially. I remember him taking a teacher of mine, God rest Mr. Warner, but Daddy took a teacher of mine to task when I was a senior in high school. I am number dyslexic. I have dyscalculia, among myriad other issues that make math a struggle for me. And Daddy said to Mr. Warner, "It's not a class in data entry." See, I would have had the process right, but I'd have missed 1 or 2 digits and decimal points, and the whole thing would just be wrong after that. Caused me to pull my hair out, gave me anxiety. I didn't need no more medication at that point, but forward, forward, forward. And went to the dad's dinner at Diane's sorority. He was convinced that Sharon, whose grades were sometimes mediocre, was the beauty of the family and Diane was the brain. He encouraged Diane to write, explaining that women had been successful in contributing scripts at the studio. He showed copies of her humorous poems to visitors at his office and sent her short stories to the story department for analysis. He enjoyed watching his daughters mature, but he resented the passing of their childhood. Excuse me. Come here, Kermit. Do a plushie's job, will you? I'm sorry. I miss my dad. He enjoyed... Oh, I read that already. Once when he was visiting friends, a little girl sat on his lap. Memories of the younger Diane and Sharon returned, and he told the girl, "I think you'd better get down, dear, or you're going to see your Uncle Walt cry." Thank you, Kermit. Thank you. Quite helpful. He cried easily at his daughter's graduations, over scripts, sometimes at the same movie scene he saw over and over. I don't know if this is true or not, but I've heard that the scene with the baby mine scene in Dumbo with... Oh, you know what I'm talking about. Thank you, Kermit. He's such a gentleman, isn't he? Since he was stinting with praise, his animators considered it a triumph if Walt cried at a scene they had created. My dad could also be a crier. I remember my Christmas of my senior year of high school. Daddy could be hard to shop for, so I was at a loss at what to get him. I'm sure he was tired of getting coffee mugs, and he was retired by then, so he didn't have any need for neckties. So I wrote him a poem. To this day it's framed, and it sits in pride of place on our bookshelf upstairs. Daddy would show that to anybody who would listen. He was growing more conservative. By 1940, thanks Kermit. By 1940, he no longer supported Franklin Roosevelt, and he voted for Wendell Willkie. His politics remained Republican thereafter, although I think he'd be embarrassed by the Republican Party these days. In the late 1940s, he took an active role in the Motion Picture Alliance for the Preservation of American Ideals, formed by industry leaders who were concerned about the communist influence in Hollywood. Communist support of the strike against his studio remained a bitter memory for Walt Disney. He had been... Oh, goodness gracious. Give me a second here. I've flooded a bit. Oh well, that's why there's a God out there who's a woman, and I believe she invented waterproof mascara. He had become disillusioned in his role as employer, explaining, "It went way back to the time when I had this little studio with kitchen chairs and old benches to sit on, and drawing boards that I had made myself. I used to sit in that chair all day long myself, and I know how hard it could get. So I got some old cushions and pillows to sit on. We got all these ragtag pillows all around. Every guy'd have a different one. So one day we got a little money, and I talked Roy into letting me buy some new rubber foam cushions. I gave each guy a cushion for his chair, and gosh, they were happy and grateful. One of the guys got his own cushion, and now he had 2 cushions on his chair. The next thing I knew, all of the fellows were demanding 2 cushions. I said, gosh, that's the limit. They were happy with no cushions. I give 'em a cushion, and they want 2. At times when Walt and Roy could not afford cash bonuses, they gave their workers payments in common stock. From a par value of $5 in 1945, the price climbed to $15 in 1946, then tumbled as the company underwent its post-war adjustment. Many employees sold their stock, and Walt considered it an act of disloyalty and lack of faith in the company. Walt himself was convinced that the studio would revive, and he bought stock at its low ebb. The stock was his principal asset, and although he lived well, by Hollywood standards, he was not a rich man. When a doctor friend asked to borrow $5,000 in 1951, Walt wrote him, "I know my answer to your request will sound funny, but I haven't got the money. I am strapped myself and have borrowed to the hilt on my insurance and on personal notes. Am close to $50,000 in debt, which is the limit of my personal borrowing ability. The new house cost much more than I anticipated, and consequently, I'm really up to my neck. So I can only say that I'm sorry that I'm unable to comply with your request." It sounded like Captain Barbossa for all the world to me. Means no. He was unconcerned about amassing money for himself, but he worried about his family's future in the event of his death. He paid little heed to his personal bank account, which his secretary, Dolores Scott, supervised. Roy often asked her, "How are Walt's finances? Don't let him get involved in some crazy scheme." Walt's daily routine began with meetings at 8 and 8:30. He reviewed storyboards in other offices or held conferences around a low square table in his own office. When he had no visitors for lunch, he ate at his desk, his favorite meal being chili and beans. Ew. He was a connoisseur, preferring to combine a can of Gebhardt's, which had much meat and few beans, with a can of Denison's, which had less meat and more beans. The dish was preceded by a glass of V8 juice and accompanied by soda crackers. If visitors were coming to lunch, they were ushered into Walt's conference room at noon. He served them an aperitif of V8 juice, a ritual that puzzled European visitors who were accustomed to something stronger. Lost my place. Walt discoursed for half an hour and then led his visitors to the choral room of the commissary, where the table in the northeast corner was reserved for him. Walt often used the lunches for press interviews. He realized the value of publicity in the selling of motion pictures, and he made himself available for all requests that his publicity director, Joseph Reddy, considered to be of value. Walt seemed to enjoy interviews, not merely for the ego's satisfaction. He liked to sum up the activities of his company, to reflect on its problems and triumphs, and to try out a new story idea on an outsider. I myself have run writing and sketch ideas past strangers in the Barnes & Noble, so why not? The Disney interview was an unstructured affair. Walt usually began expounding on the matters that had occupied him in the morning. He continued talking about the many projects of the studio, responding occasionally to an interjected question. After lunch, Walt liked to climb in a golf cart and show the visitor what was happening on the studio stages and in the shops. More meetings were scheduled in the afternoon, and he often left the office to inspect projects in the shops. At 5 in the afternoon, he quit work for his stretching exercise, a drink of scotch, and a rub-down. I don't think I've ever had scotch. I'd like to try it sometime. By the end of the day, Walt was in considerable pain from the old polo injury to his neck. Yes, Kermit. Just like that. One day in 1951, he complained about it to Floyd Odlum, the industrialist who had long been promoting research in the treatment of arthritis. Walt wrote Odlum about a specialist Odlum had recommended. He diagnosed my case as a form of arthritis, but not the usual variety. It seems I have a calcium deposit that continues building up in my neck, which is probably caused by a polo injury I received some years ago when I took a spill from my horse. He thinks that he can relieve this condition somewhat, but he has also convinced me that I will probably have to live with it the rest of my life. My heart and other vital organs, along with the history of my ancestry, all indicated that I am going to live a long life, so I'm going to have to learn to live with this condition and make the best of it. Hazel George, the studio nurse, applied the treatment. It consisted of hot packs and intermittent traction. She tried a prone position which would allow the heat and traction to be applied at the same time. Walt declined because he couldn't sip his drink at the same time. "I'll give you a straw," Hazel suggested. The treatment was applied in a room next to Walt's office, and he called it his laughing place, as in the Uncle Remus stories. It was where he could gain a perspective on the day's activities, exchange gossip with Hazel, confide his plans. Walt, who had received honorary degrees at Harvard, Yale, and the University of California, don't tell Major Winchester, once remarked to Hazel, "I'd trade all my degrees for your real one." She advised him it would be a bad idea. "It would ruin you. Your work would lose its originality, its spontaneity." One evening, in a mellow mood, Walt reflected to Hazel, "You know, I finally found out who I am." "Well, who are you?" Hazel asked. "I'm the last of the benevolent monarchs." She thought about it and replied, "That's good. Now I know what I am." "What's that?" "The last of the court jesters." The conversations with Hazel sometimes grew philosophical, and once she and Walt were discussing various kinds of love, parents for children, human beings for pets, etc. As sometimes happened, Walt tired of the conversation and ended it with a summation. "Well, Hazel, let's face it. Love is like everything else. If you don't have it, you can't give it. Please take those words to heart. Keep just a little bit of love. Any love. Just so you can give it. Please. We need it." The heat treatment and traction lasted for, oh God, there go the eyes again. Excuse me. The heat treatment and traction lasted 45 minutes, and Walt felt relaxed and refreshed, eager to return to work. Hazel tried to discourage him, but was not always successful. He sometimes called a story meeting that lasted into the evening. Dinner was kept waiting for him at home. He ate heartily and sometimes had to cut down on his consumption when his weight pushed over 185 pounds. When research connected animal fats to the occurrence of heart disease, he asked a doctor, "Does that mean eating fats could make you old before your time?" He was told it did, and Walt went on a diet to cut down fats. But he wouldn't quit smoking. He admitted that he was wrong in smoking. One day he mused to Hazel, "You're right about one thing. Smoking and drinking are sins. Because you are one of God's creatures, and if you don't take care of the body He gave you, you are committing a sin." He still smoked. You know, I have a friend. I'll not mention him because I'm sure he's watching this. But every time he lit a cigarette, I would tell him, Bing Crosby, Humphrey Bogart, Tony Jay, Walt Disney, all famous figures who died of complications from smoking. Nat King Cole, come to that. And he'd say, "Well, I'm not going to quit because I'm no quitter," or something silly like that. I'm still on his case to quit. If my dad could quit, anyone can. On rare occasions, Walt went out in the evening to banquets and civic dinners. He disliked such affairs, but he agreed to attend out of duty. When a formal speech was expected, he agonized over it. He detested the stilted speeches that were written for him. "I don't use all those big words. Make it sound like me." Walt was most effective when he had no written speech, but merely talked to the audience as he would in normal conversation. He could evoke as many laughs as a stand-up comedian. Walt never told jokes, either before an audience or in conversations. Employees learned not to try to tell him jokes, since he hadn't the patience to listen to them. Telling a dirty joke to Walt could evoke a stony silence. Not that he was prudish. Like any farm boy, he had learned about sex at an early age. To him, sex was not a ludicrous subject, nor did it hold any great mystery. Above all, he believed that sex was a private matter, and that is the way he preferred to leave it. He refused to be treated as a special person because of his position as head of an ever-growing enterprise. He allowed no one to light his cigarettes, help him on with his coat, or hold doors open for him. Sycophantic employees lasted a brief time around Walt. When he visited a movie set or walked down a hall, he didn't like to be accosted. His time was limited, and he wanted to choose the persons he talked to, whether it was a producer or a prop man. As the studio grew, it became more and more difficult for Walt to remember the names of his workers. To assist his memory, he had the personnel department supply his office with a complete file so he could match names and photographs of those he encountered in his daily rounds. In honor of Jim Henson's 84th birthday, I think. Oh, who are the people in your neighborhood? In your neighborhood, in your neighborhood. Oh, who are the people in your neighborhood? The people that you meet each day. I find it very touching that Walt maintained knowledge of the people he worked with. No one is too important to be kind. Disney workers, even those with long-time service at the studio, were perplexed over how to react in casual encounters with the boss. They realized that he could be concentrating on an important company matter and would not want to be disturbed, but those who did not greet him were sometimes given a gruff, "What's the matter, you mad at me?" A secretary faced the dilemma one afternoon as she found herself walking toward Walt in the long, lonely corridor of the animation building's 3rd floor. He seemed to be immersed in thought, and she decided her best plan was to pass him without a greeting. As she did so, she heard a voice, almost disembodied like a ventriloquist's, say, "Hey, good-looking." She was puzzled. After she had gone 10 paces, she looked around at the retreating figure. At that moment, Walt swung around, pointed a finger, and exclaimed an impish, "Ha!" Then he continued on his way. All right, that ends chapter 18 of Walt Disney, An American Original by Bob Thomas. But it certainly does not end my enthusiasm, my love for y'all, or this video quite. Let's see. Now it's time to say goodbye to all our company. M-I-C, see you real soon. K-E-Y, why? Because we like you. M-O-U-S-E. Take care of yourselves, stay safe, and happy birthday, Jim Henson.